The Sybarites are slaves to their belly, and lovers of luxury, and so great was their devotion to luxury that of the peoples elsewhere their preference was, above all, for the Ionians and the Turanians, because they found that the former surpassed the other Greeks, and the latter, the other barbarians, in the extravagance of their manner of life. We are told that a wealthy Sybarite, on hearing some person say that a man had suffered a rupture at the sight of some men working, begged the speaker not to be astounded at that. "For I," he said, "at the mere hearing of it, have suffered a stitch in my side." Of another Sybarite it is told that he remarked, after a visit to Sparta, that he used to wonder at the bravery of the Spartans, but that now, after witnessing what a frugal and utterly miserable life they led, he could only conclude that they were no better than the lowest of men. "For the most cowardly Sybarite," he said, "would choose to die thrice rather than to endure a life like theirs." The man among them who, we are told, indulged in the greatest luxury was known as Mindarites. Mindarites, men say, surpassed the other Sybarites in luxury, for when Cleisthenes, the tyrant of Sicyon, after winning the chariot race, made proclamation that any who purposed to marry his daughter, who was considered a girl of surpassing beauty, should gather at his home, Mindarites, we are told, set sail from Sybaris in a ship of 50 oars, the rowers being slaves of his own household, some of them fishermen and others fowlers. And upon his arrival in Sicyon, he surpassed in the equipage his fortune afforded him, not only the rival suitors, but also the tyrant himself, although the whole city was participating eagerly in the occasion. And at the dinner, which was held after his arrival, when a certain man approached Mindarites to recline beside him at the table, the latter remarked that he was here in accordance with the proclamation, and intended to recline either with the lady or by himself. The man is ill or in a poor state of health who shrinks from a slight draught. Something is wrong with a man's eyes if they are offended by white clothing. The man is enfeebled by soft living who gets a pain in his side from seeing somebody else work. The story is that there was once a citizen of Sybaris, a certain Mindarites, who seeing a man digging and swinging his mattock on high, complained that it made him weary, and ordered the man not to do such work in his sight. The same man complained that he felt worse because the rose leaves upon which he had lain were crumpled. When pleasures have corrupted both mind and body, nothing seems to be tolerable, not because the suffering is hard, but because the sufferer is soft. A Sybarite, who had sojourned in Sparta and had been entertained among them at their public mess, remarked, "It is no wonder that the Spartans are the bravest men in the world, for anyone in his right mind would prefer to die 10,000 times rather than share in such a poor living." But Mindarites the Sybarite was a very different sort of man, my Greek friends, who, when he went forth to marry Agariste, the daughter of Cleisthenes, carried his luxury and ostentation to such a height that he took with him 1,000 slaves, fishermen, bird-catchers, and cooks. But this man, wishing to display how magnificently he lived, according to the account given to us by Camillo of Ponticus in his book On Pleasure, but the same book is also attributed to Theophrastus, said that for 20 years he had never seen the sun rise or set, and this he considered a great and marvelous proof of his wealth and happiness. Why need we mention the Sybarites, among whom bathing men and pourers of water were first introduced in fetters, in order to prevent their going too fast, and to prevent also their scalding the bathers in their haste? And the Sybarites were the first people to forbid those who practiced noisy arts from dwelling in their city, such as blacksmiths and carpenters, and men of similar trades, providing that their slumbers should always be undisturbed. And it used to be unlawful to rear a cock in their city. And Timaeus relates concerning them that a citizen of Sybaris, once going into the country, seeing the farmers digging, said that he himself felt as if he had broken his bones by the sight. And someone who had heard him replied, "I, when I heard you say this, felt as if I had a pain in my side." And once at Croton, some Sybarites were standing by some one of the athletes, who was digging up dust for the palestra. and said they marveled that men who had such a city had no slaves to dig the palestra for them. But another Sybarite, coming to Lacedaemon and being invited to the Fatedium, sitting down on a wooden seat and eating with them, said that originally he had been surprised at hearing of the valor of the Lacedaemonians, but that now that he had seen it, he thought that they in no respect surpassed other men, for that the greatest coward on earth would rather die 1,000 times than live and endure such a life as theirs. The Sybarites delighted only in Maltese puppy dogs, and in men which were no men. The Sybarites used to wear also garments made of Milesian wool, from which there arose great friendship between the two cities, as Timaeus relates. For of the inhabitants of Italy, the Sybarites gave the preference to the Etruscans, and of foreigners to the Ionians, because they were devoted to luxury. But the cavalry of the Sybarites, being in number more than 5,000, used to go in procession, with saffron-colored robes over their breastplates, and in the summer their younger men used to go away to the caves of the nymphs of the river Lucius, and live there in all kinds of luxury. And whenever the rich men of that country left the city for the country, although they always traveled in chariots, still they used to consume 3 days in a day's journey. And some of the roads which led to their villas in the country were covered with awnings all over, and a great many of them had cellars near the sea, into which their wine was brought by canals from the country, and some of it was then sold out of the district, but some was brought into the city in boats. They also celebrate in public a number of feasts, and they honor those who display great magnificence on such occasions with golden crowns, and they proclaim their names at the public sacrifices and games, announcing not only their general goodwill towards the city, but also the great magnificence which they had displayed in the feasts. And on these occasions they even crowned those cooks who have served up the most exquisite dishes, and among the Sybarites there were found baths in which, while they lay down, they were steamed with warm vapors, and they were the first people who introduced the custom of bringing chamber pots to banquets. But laughing at those who left their countries to travel in foreign lands, they themselves used to boast that they had grown old without ever having crossed the bridges which led over their frontier rivers. Aristotle, in his treatise on admirable and wonderful things, says that Alcisthenes of Sybaris, out of luxury, had a garment prepared for him of such excessive expensiveness that he exhibited it at Licinium, at the festival of Hera, at which all the Italians assemble, and that of all things which were exhibited, that was the most admired. But it seems to me that besides the fact of the riches of the Sybarites, the very natural character of their country, since there are no harbors on their coasts, and since in consequence nearly all the produce of the land is consumed by the citizens themselves, and to some extent also an oracle of the god, has excited them all to luxury, and has caused them to live in practices of most immoderate dissoluteness. But their city lies in a hollow, and, in summer, is liable to excess of cold both morning and evening, but in the middle of the day the heat is tolerable, so that the greater part of them believe that the rivers contribute a great deal to the health of the inhabitants. On which account it has been said that a man who, living at Sybaris, wishes not to die before his time, ought never to see the sun either rise or set. And once they sent to the oracle to consult the god, and one of the ambassadors was named Amiris, and to ask how long their prosperity should last. And the priestess of Delphi answered them, "You shall be happy, Sybarite, very happy, and all your time in entertainments pass, while you continue to the immortal gods the worship due. But when you come at length to honor mortal man beyond the gods, then foreign war and intestine sedition shall come upon you, and shall crush your city." When they had heard this, they thought the god had said to them that they should never have their luxury terminated, for that there was no chance of their ever honoring a man more than God. But in agreement with the oracle they experienced a change of fortune, when one of them, flogging one of his slaves, continued to beat him after he had sought an asylum in a sanctuary. But when at last he fled to the tomb of his father, he let him go, out of shame. But their whole revenues were dissipated, by the way in which they rivaled one another in luxury, and the city also rivaled all other cities in luxury. And not long after this circumstance, when many omens of impending destruction, which it is not necessary to allude to further at present, had given them notice, they were destroyed. But they had carried their luxury to such a pitch that they had taught even their horses to dance at their feasts to the music of the flute. Accordingly, the people of Croton, knowing this and being at war with them, as Aristotle relates in his History of the Constitution of Sybaris, played before their horses the tune to which they were accustomed to dance. For the people of Croton also had flute players in military uniform, and as soon as the horses heard them playing on the flute, they not only began to dance, but ran over to the army of the Crotonians, carrying their riders with them. Phylarchus states that the Sybarites, having given loose to their luxury, made a law that women might be invited to banquets, and that those who intended to invite them to sacred festivities must make preparation a year before, in order that they might have all that time to provide themselves with garments and other ornaments in a suitable manner worthy of the occasion, and so might come to the banquet to which they were invited. And if any caterer or cook invented any peculiar and excellent dish, no other artist was allowed to make this for a year, but he alone who invented it was entitled to all the profit to be derived from the manufacture of it for that time, in order that others might be induced to labor at excelling in such pursuits. And in the same way, it was provided that those who sold eels were not to be liable to pay tribute, nor those who caught them either. And in the same way, the laws exempted from all burdens those who dyed the marine purple and those who imported it. They then, having carried their luxury and insolence to a great height, at last, when 30 ambassadors came to them from the people of Croton, slew them all, and threw their bodies down over the wall, and left them there to be eaten by beasts. And this was the beginning of great evils to them, as the deity was much offended at it. Accordingly, a few days afterwards, all their chief magistrates appeared to see the same vision at one night. For they thought they saw Hera coming into the midst of the marketplace, and vomiting gall, and a spring of blood arose in her sanctuary. But even then they did not desist from their arrogance, until they were all destroyed by the Crotonians. But Heraclides of Pontus, in his treatise on justice, says, "The Sybarites, having put down the tyranny of Tellus, and having destroyed all those who had exercised authority, met them and slew them at the altar of the gods. And at the sight of this slaughter the statue of Hera turned itself away, and the floor sent up a fountain of blood, so that they were forced to cover all the place round with brazen tablets, wishing to stop the rising of the blood, on which account they were all driven from the city and destroyed."